Hello, my name is Mariah Delling, and today I will be presenting my capstone research on the expanding role of school resource officers under Texas House Bill 3. This legislation was enacted in 2023 as a direct response to the Uvalde tragedy of 2022. My goal in this project is to examine what HB 3 means for Texas schools, including its potential strengths, its unintended consequences, and its broader impact on school safety. School shootings have, unfortunately, reshaped how we think about safety in education. The tragedy at Robb Elementary in Uvalde in 2022 really forced lawmakers to take action because it exposed major gaps in security. In response, Texas passed House Bill 3, which requires every public school campus to have an armed officer. This research focuses on how effective this approach is, particularly through the lens of deterrence theory and the role of school resource officers. The goal is not to just review what the law says, but to evaluate how well it might actually improve safety and to offer some recommendations for moving forward. At its core, House Bill 3 was Texas's legislative response to the Uvalde tragedy. Passed in 2023, the law requires every public school campus to employ at least one armed security officer. Along with this mandate, the bill provides some state funding and outlines training and emergency response standards. The philosophy behind it is deterrence, the idea that a visible law enforcement presence will discourage potential offenders and prevent acts of violence before they occur. This represents a significant shift in how the state envisions school safety, moving toward a security-first model that prioritizes armed presence. To really understand why lawmakers place so much emphasis on having armed officers, we need to look at the criminological foundation behind the policy, deterrence theory. This theory helps explain the assumptions built into HB 3 and gives us a way to critically evaluate whether the law is likely to achieve its intended outcomes. The deterrence theory suggests that people are less likely to commit crimes if they believe the costs outweigh the benefits. Deterrence is categorized into two main types: general deterrence and specific deterrence. General deterrence discourages the broader public from offending, while specific deterrence focuses on preventing an individual from reoffending. Under House Bill 3, the presence of armed officers on every campus is designed to serve as a visible deterrent. The assumption is that a strong law enforcement presence discourages both students and outside threats from engaging in violence. However, the key question is whether this framework actually works with adolescents, who often act impulsively or without fully considering long-term consequences. Now that we understand the theory lawmakers used to justify House Bill 3, the next question is, does it actually work in practice? To answer that, we need to look at what research tells us about school resource officers and their effectiveness. Studies show that their effectiveness is mixed. For instance, some districts report around a 30% reduction in firearm-related incidents after placing officers in schools, which suggests a potential deterrent effect. On the other hand, the same research highlights troubling patterns, such as increases of nearly 20% in nonviolent referrals and disproportionate impacts on minority students. Data from the U.S. Department of Education shows that Black students are over 3 times more likely than their white peers to be arrested or referred to law enforcement. So, while school resource officers may help deter severe threats, their presence can also contribute to widening discipline gaps and unintentionally escalating minor misbehavior into justice system involvement. This tension sets the stage for why House Bill 3's reliance on deterrence is both promising and problematic. While the research highlights both the promise and limitations of school resource officers, it is important to step back and look specifically at how Texas House Bill 3 tries to address these concerns. So let's start with the strengths built into the policy. House Bill 3 does have some notable strengths. First, it makes school safety a statewide priority, ensuring that every campus has some form of security presence. This helps close the gaps between districts with more resources and those with fewer. Second, the law includes funding provisions, so schools are not left to absorb all the costs on their own. And finally, House Bill 3 reflects a proactive approach. Rather than waiting for another tragedy, it sets standards for safety planning, officer training, and emergency response procedures. Now, while there are clear strengths to House Bill 3, it is equally important to acknowledge its weaknesses. No policy is without trade-offs, and House Bill 3 carries significant limitations that impact its overall effectiveness. One major limitation is adolescent impulsivity. Deterrence assumes people make rational decisions by weighing risks and benefits, but teenagers often act on impulse, which weakens this effect. Another concern is the risk of increased disciplinary referrals and arrests, especially for minor infractions, which can funnel more students into the justice system. There are also disparities in how officers are trained across districts, resulting in uneven implementation and inconsistent outcomes. Finally, House Bill 3 does not address root causes of violence, like mental health struggles or school climate issues, so the policy risks focusing too much on surface level security without tackling the deeper problems. Now that we've looked at the broader limitations of House Bill 3, it's important to shift towards what happens when the policy is actually put into practice. Even strong laws on paper can face serious challenges during implementation, and that is especially true when we consider funding, staffing, and consistency across school districts. The implementation of House Bill 3 reveals some practical barriers. First, funding gaps remain a significant issue, particularly in rural districts where budgets are already tight. Many schools are struggling to meet the mandate without clear financial support. Second, officer shortages across Texas make it difficult to staff every campus, and the lack of uniform training standards means the quality of student resource officer preparation can vary greatly from district to district. Finally, there's the question of balance. How do schools maintain a safe environment without undermining the overall climate of trust and learning? These challenges show that even well-intended policies can falter if the infrastructure is not there to support them. When we look at House Bill 3's impact, what we find is only partial deterrence. While the policy is based on deterrence theory, the evidence shows limited effectiveness in actually preventing school shootings. Studies suggest that while the presence of law enforcement may discourage some behaviors, it does not fully address the deeper factors driving violence. At the same time, there are unintended effects, such as mistrust between students and school authorities, or an increase in exclusionary discipline practices. These can negatively affect the school climate. Ultimately, this shows that while House Bill 3 contributes one layer of security, it cannot stand alone. Broader prevention strategies, including mental health support and school climate initiatives, are needed to make campuses truly safer. When thinking about ways to improve House Bill 3's approach, several recommendations stand out. First, school resource officer training needs to be strengthened. Most officers are well prepared for traditional policing, but schools are a very different environment. Specialized training in adolescent development, de-escalation strategies, and conflict resolution would help school resource officers handle situations in ways that prevent unnecessary arrests and build trust with students. Second, pairing school resource officers with mental health staff can address some of the root causes of violence. Many school safety issues are tied to stress, trauma, or mental health struggles. By embedding counselors and psychologists alongside officers, schools can provide support before issues escalate into crises. Third, hybrid safety models show real promise. States like Colorado have experimented with approaches that combine limited school resource officer presence with restorative justice practices and counseling. This balanced model emphasizes repairing harm and preventing conflict rather than relying only on punishment or deterrence. Finally, it's critical to evaluate outcomes, not just in terms of whether schools are safer, but also whether policies are equitable. That means tracking both reductions in violence and how students experience these measures, including whether there are disproportionate disciplinary impacts on minority students. Without that kind of evaluation, we risk repeating old patterns instead of moving toward lasting solutions. Having walked through the theoretical lens, the mixed findings on school resource officer effectiveness, and the strengths and weaknesses of House Bill 3, we can now step back and draw some overall conclusions about what this policy really means for school safety. House Bill 3 represents a bold attempt by Texas to respond to fears of school violence with visible, immediate measures. The logic of deterrence, making potential offenders think twice because of law enforcement presence, is clear. And the policy does offer benefits, such as greater visibility of safety measures and, in some cases, reductions in certain nonviolent incidents. But the picture is complicated. The research shows that the effectiveness of school resource officers in actually preventing shootings is limited, and the policy carries unintended risks, such as more student arrests, uneven officer training, and an over-reliance on deterrence when many root causes of violence lie in mental health and school climate. Ultimately, the takeaway is that House Bill 3 is a starting point, but not a complete solution. True school safety requires blending law enforcement with broader prevention strategies, especially counseling, restorative justice, and equity-focused approaches. By learning from other states and continually evaluating outcomes, Texas has the opportunity to evolve House Bill 3 into a policy that balances safety with fairness and long-term impact.